Does cultural appropriation drive you crazy? Or is that something you're like, no, I get that?
Well, it's not always right. And so there's that. And I get it, which doesn't make it okay. I mean, again, understanding what's happening. Like, I feel like, take this in a slightly different direction just for the point of clarification. Like, trauma is real. And some of that trauma is the result of horrible things that were done to people by other people. And so to say, for example, now this is an extreme case, to say, look, I can understand and somewhat appreciate the complexity of the abuser's situation. They were also hurt. They were hurt by people who were hurt by people who were hurt by people. None of that makes what they're doing okay. Like, so you can kind of hold the two together without reconciling them. And it's easier, of course, the more distance you have from the thing.
Right.
So cultural appropriation doesn't bother me in the same way as it would bother someone with less privilege and power whose culture is being appropriated, right? So, but I can still say, hey, you know what? I don't think that's cool. I think we should actually have a conversation about why we assume that some of these things are quote unquote free for the taking. Like, why that's not yours. Like, right. Where'd you get that? That's not you.
Well, isn't culture,
without at the same time, because real quick, the flip side of that is also untenable to me, which is the kind of, liberal hand wringing about some of this stuff. We could get silly in any different direction on the spectrum. Mm-hmm. So trying to be pragmatic and trying to have a conversation. I think we all need to have a set of adult conversations about what it takes to do better, right? We can all do better, like all of us, so we can have those conversations. So no, it doesn't drive me crazy. And I don't think it's right. I'm trying to give a nuanced answer as possible. But you were about to say something, Will.
I mean, two things can also be true at the same time, right? It
yes.
can be a complicated issue. But I think where people kind of lose sight and can't see the forest through the trees is the idea of intent, right? Because culture is meant to be shared, especially in America. We're a melting pot. I live in New York. I live next to New York City. There's more cultures here than around the rest of the world combined, probably.
Some of which can melt. Some of which can melt. And others of which can't. So that's an interesting conversation to have there. Even in the 20th century history of immigration, there were groups, including the Italians, the Greeks, the Jews, that were the object of racist attacks, who then over time became white, or at least white enough.
Yes.
And so, the melting pot ideology is not a multicultural one. It is a monomyth kind of ideology. Like, well, and it leaves out the people who can't melt. And, so there's that. But
okay, interesting. Where was I going to go with that? Because intent. I'm going back to intent, because intent
that's
matters.
Right. Yeah.
Intent matters. Now, there is. I'm not going to say cultural appropriation isn't real, because there is definitely ways you can mock other people's cultures in a way that is harmful, in the ways, like you said, power structure and all that thing. But there's plenty of ways it's just like good old-fashioned fun as well. Like, for example, if I want to have, I don't want to use me as an example, but if someone wanted to have a themed wedding, right? Like they want a mariachi band because they generally love Bad Bunny and generally love Spanish. Like, I generally love Spanish music. I listen to Spanish music all the time, but it's because I'm white. I can't have like a live performance of a mariachi band at my wedding. I don't plan on doing that, but I can't do that based on the laws of cultural appropriation. It's like appropriation could also mean appreciation.
Sure. And the reality is there are no laws. So
right.
there
also
are, and this is where it comes back to power relations. So I think intent is good, and that's the right word to bring to the forefront. And along with intent, I think you have to pair it with a word that sounds similar but is different, and that's like intention and intentionality. So some people are very thoughtful and intentional, and they're going to approach something like you talked about, like what music you want to have at your wedding, right? There's no law. You should have whatever music you want to have. And if you're thoughtful and intentional, there may be a series of conversations that you want to have with yourselves, with, the other people in the wedding party, with et cetera, and come up with something that, takes into account the fact that there are historical inequalities in power relations and things of that nature. Now, you might do that. I think the thing that people are most troubled by is the fact that the lack of any thoughtfulness or intent and the assumption that, well, I can do this because it is funny, right? It only gets to be funny from a position of unexamined privilege. And that's the thing that's rubbing people the wrong way. It's like, don't you even realize that without any sort of thought or care, like you're able to, right? You're able to like, oh, this is just a joke, right? The fact that you can even say that means you're not appreciating the full significance of what's going on. Is any of this simple? No, I don't think so. Do I think that the extreme right and the extreme left both get goofy on this topic? Of course I do. But do I think there's something really valuable in the middle where we actually ought to be questioning ourselves probably more than we are? Yeah, I do. Because honestly, being more thoughtful, being more engaged, being more appreciative, this brings us back to what I hope is going to be a through line through this conversation, which is I really think we ought to be talking more, not less.
Absolutely.
With each other and with people who are different from us. And rather than starting from the premise of, hey, this is going to be okay, right? It might be interesting to ask the question rather than try to have the answer already. So I think people should talk more. I think we should get more uncomfortable. I think we should, I tell my kids, I've got two boys, 8 and 11, I try not to believe everything I think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they get that yet, but like we're trying to at least introduce this idea that, listen, you can have opinions just like everybody else. You can have thoughts, but don't confuse those thoughts for reality.
Right.
Check them out.